Hello and welcome to this session. So in this session, we'll talk about a very important concept called as constraints. So what are constraints and why they are used? Before that, we'll have to create a small table and then we'll see like what issues we have in this table and then we'll understand how we can rectify that. Okay. So I'm going to create a table. I will call the table as customer. So I'll have few details here. Customer ID, which is a number. Let's give it as number as 3. Then I want a customer name. So varchar 2, probably 50. Customer email, varchar 2 of 50, right? Cust gender, right? Varchar 2 of 1. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have this table. So let's go and execute this. And the table is created. Now let's insert some data into this table. Okay. I'll say insert into customer. So let's do cust ID, cust name, customer email, and customer gender, right? So I'm gonna say value. So let's add a value. Okay, so uh, let's say okay, let's start with 10, right? Customer name, let's say John, right? Customer email is john@gmail.com. Gender is male, right? Okay. So I'm going to execute this. I am going to copy this here again. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this. So instead of John, I'll say Mary. All right. Mary, let it be female. Okay. Then let's create one more. Let's say customer is 11. The customer name is Joseph, right? So let me say Joseph. And here I would say MYD. MYD. Okay. Okay. So we have given only 10, right? So I will put as we have given the varchar as just one. So we can only have one character. So I'll put it as T. Okay. So this row is also inserted. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert, let's just say customer gender. Okay. So I'm going to say the value M. Okay. All right. Okay. I think this is sufficient for now. So let me just select from the customer table. Okay. All right. So let me execute this and let's pull this up here. Okay. Now let's see what are the issues that we have. See, the customer ID is basically an ID. It should be unique, right? So you will have a ID, I will have an ID, and both of us should have a different ID. So in this case, what is happening is the ID is repeated. There is duplication, right? So that should not happen. The same ID cannot be given to different people, right? So that is one. Now, if you look the other things, if you look at this particular column, right? So if this record, the customer ID, customer name, email, they are null, right? Only we have customer gender. So how does what that information serves no purpose for us, right? So customer gender is male, so it does not tell anything about the customer. We are not able to identify that customer, correct? Right. Similarly, the customer gender here is T. So you can have gender like M for male, F for female, or O for others, but T or other values we may not want to allow, right? So we can put those rules, right? So I mean, when you are inserting the data, you can insert any data, right? So instead of a customer name, you can insert the value 10, right, or 100. So it will still take it. So what I'm trying to get to here is like when we are inserting data, when we are loading the data, we should ensure that only the validated data or correct data has been inserted. we need to provide some rules. We need to add some rules. We need to say like, hey, customer ID cannot be null. You have to have a value, or customer ID should be unique. You cannot have the same customer ID repeated multiple times. Okay. And customer gender, let's say we only have few values. Or if you add a salary, we can also add a rule saying that hey, this salary can always be should always be greater than zero. Okay. So we can add all these rules. So these rules are what we call as constraints. Okay. So we call them as constraints. So constraints will basically tell us the rules that we can apply to the data. So there are different types of constraints that we have. Okay, so we'll look at all of this one by one. So the different constraints that we have here is, let me just put this like this. So we have a null, not null constraint. So not null constant basically says that whatever the column that you are putting this rule not null, this basically means that that particular field must be not null. That means that particular field should have some value. So that is what not null means. Then we have a unique constraint. So unique constraint basically tells you like that value should be unique. You cannot have repeated value. Then we have primary key. Okay, so now primary key is an interesting thing. So primary key says that the values should be unique. So that is basically what unique constant is, right? So how primary key and unique key are different. So primary key does not have a null. So in unique, you can have null, one null, because if there is only one null, that means it is unique, right? But primary key cannot have null. So no null, right? So that is the primary key. Then we also have a foreign key. So foreign key basically says foreign key is between two tables. So let's say a value in one table is a reflection of a value in another table. So basically, let's say there is an employee table, there is a department table, and they are basically related to each other. And if you are saying that if you want to add a department ID to employee table, that ID should be part of the department table. So there should be some relation. Okay. So that is what the foreign key talks about. Again, we'll see this in detail. Don't worry about this. Uh, then we have a check constraint. So check constraint basically checks like I was talking about the salary, right? So basically like, okay, this if you're adding a value, if you're adding a data to a particular column, it gives you a check saying, hey, this data can only take this values, right? So for example, salary, it can only be greater than zero. So these are the check constraints that you can have. And then there is default. So if you don't provide any value, but then by default, it will pick up some value. So these are basically the constraints that we have. So using this constraint, we can ensure that we provide certain rules so that some of the validations are taken care. You can still have some bad data coming in, but that is fine. Like you can have the proper rules here. So this is very, very important. You need to ensure that you put the right constraint, use the right constraint. So this is again part of the designing phase, right? So you have to design your tables properly in order for us to use this. All right. Okay. So what we'll do here in the next few sessions is each of these constraints that we will look at it, we'll understand what exactly it is and how we can use it. We basically will create some tables and we will insert the data and see like how this works. And once that is done is we will take this knowledge and we will apply in our project, which is Amazon. So remember we created one large table and we said like there are so many issues with that table. Now we're going to create smaller tables to it, and then we will use these constraints in those smaller tables so that the data stays relevant and it is good. All right. Okay. So I hope this was helpful and I'll see you guys in the next class.